Before this video begins, I would like to give a quick thank you to my Asban Team level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Doctor Who and horror stories have gone hand in hand ever since its creation in 1963. Some of these scary sci-fi tales are absolutely acclaimed and beloved, pushing the boundaries of family TV with all sorts of terrifying monsters that have continued to traumatise kids. However, for every empty child and blink, we have stories like The Power of Kroll and Night Terrors. And today we're going to be looking at one such story, Series 9's Sleep No More, a found footage horror story so derided it inspired me to start my Defending the Despised series all the way back in 2019. You know, when I used to write on my videos in hand. But 4 years and a face later, have my opinions on this episode changed? It's a slow burn methodical story exploring a classic Doctor Who mystery in a unique way. But does it still deserve redemption, or is it right to be hated and considered the worst story in Series 9? Well, as always, that's what I'm here to find out. So wipe the sleep dust from your eyes and get ready for a trip to Neptune, because it's time to take a deep dive into Sleep No More.
Mr. Sandman, man me a sand, make him the cutest man corridor who can.
First, I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room, found footage. When writing Sleep No More, Gatiss wanted to explore uncharted territory and take Doctor Who in an ambitious new direction, realising the show had never done found footage before. Of course, for the uninitiated, found footage is a media technique usually appearing in horror fiction where we follow the story through the cameras present within the fiction itself. Think camcorders, security cameras, phones, webcams, all that kind of stuff. Found footage takes advantage of pretty much any kinds of cameras, which makes it ideal for more grounded and personal horror narratives, really throwing the viewer into the thick of it and making them feel as though they themselves are part of the events unfolding on screen, because we see most of it through the direct perspectives of the characters themselves. This found footage approach is established wonderfully as Rhys Shearsmith's Rasmussen pleads with us to not watch the episode, before the usual Doctor Who stinger is replaced with a simple graphic with character names and the title of the show, so it immediately invites you to immerse yourself in this unique style of episode. I really appreciate the commitment to the format, removing that familiar framing of the usual title sequence to drive home how this isn't a typical episode, so after this point you really don't know what to expect. Not only is the use of found footage a novel and creative approach for Sleep No More as a Doctor Who episode, it also does wonders for the atmosphere, with all these supposed cameras emphasising the darkness and gloominess in the best way possible, making things incredibly spooky. Usually in fiction, when the lights go out on characters, there's still artificial lighting allowing us as viewers to see at least a little bit, whereas, you know, the actual characters can't actually see anything. However, that doesn't really happen here because of the organic found footage style. We're quite literally watching through the eyes of the actual characters, so we see the exact darkness they're also seeing. We don't know where the threats might be lurking, which makes for a very intense and claustrophobic feeling. Something that wouldn't really exist or work to the same extent if this was a traditional Doctor Who episode format, with those bright off-screen artificial lights making everything clear to us as the audience. It all works to create this oppressive and terrifying feeling of uncertainty that runs firmly throughout the episode. I also like how the changing filming techniques make the actors and the production team alter their skills and think more carefully about how they craft the episode. The actors have to deliver a lot of their lines directly to a camera as if it's one of their fellow cast members, but they manage to do it so convincingly you often forget or overlook how it's filmed. You genuinely buy into the perspective of being one of the characters. It's just that immersive and that well shot.
So what happened?
From the beginning of time, that's a very long story.
Speaking of the characters, we soon meet the military rescue team sent to investigate the Leverrier space station orbiting Neptune in the 38th century. I think this is a really interesting setting, especially when you consider that all of Gatiss's previous TV stories were set in the past or the present. Having it as a space station in the outer planets feels a lot more fresh than if it was orbiting Earth or like Venus. Instead, it gets to play with the idea of human colonization of the solar system, dropping hints that moons like Triton have been fully colonized and turned into entire settlements and civilizations, something a lot of other sci-fi properties love to explore, but this is one of the few times Doctor Who has done it, so I really like it as a backdrop. Sleep No More is rich with this kind of world building, especially the idea of Japanese and Indian culture blending and hybridizing together because of some unspecified catastrophe bringing the two countries together geographically, giving us this assortment of characters whose actors all have mixed heritage. It's a small touch, but I love it because it creates a sense of authenticity for the future. It's always weird when these sci-fi franchises show the future future and everyone is just a white American. Remember, this is like 1,700 years in our future. A lot of cultures and races are bound to have intermingled and blended together in that time, especially with how populous India is. Like I said, it's a very small touch, but it does wonders for world building because of how realistic and authentic it feels to have characters like this. And whilst we're on the topic of the world building and backstory of Sleep No More, Gatiss paints a brilliantly dystopian picture when it comes to the episode's world.
We live in a time of unparalleled prosperity.
To start with, let's talk about the grunt known simply as 474, who is played by Bethany Black, the first openly trans actor in the show's history, which, is just a neat milestone for Doctor Who. 474 is interesting because she's a factory-made mindless drone, purely part of the team to take damage for the others and undergo the risks the humans don't want to take. We're told that these artificial grunts are designed to be strong and durable at the expense of the intelligence and brain functions. Their creators give them limited speech, so they're more like puppies or toddlers than actual soldiers.
That thing's meant to be a lethal fighting machine, it just moons around like a lovesick puppy.
A character like this creates a really interesting contrast to the rest of the characters, introducing this sharp social divide as the other characters belittle 474 and treat her as a lesser being just because of her origins.
Don't be angry. It's so hard to breed them to speak properly.
I mentioned in my Defending the Despised video that this is similar to the Flesh from Series 6, how the humans simply see these grunts as tools, bullet sponges with no sentience and, no rights. But it's clear that 474 and her kind are valid and sentient beings deserving of their own rights and legal protections. She displays genuine emotion and intelligence throughout the narrative, and it opens up that age-old debate on the rights of artificial beings. It makes you wonder just how widespread these grunts are in this future society, and how they must feel so isolated, not even being given the chance to express their own thoughts and emotions, because they're used as nothing more than weapons.
That's disgusting.
Well, that's how they roll in the 38th century.
I appreciate how the narrative gives Chopra a good character journey as he learns to accept and value 474 as an actual being. He starts off the episode very prejudiced against grunts, constantly demeaning 474 and mocking her for being obsessed with him. But over time he begins to see the humanity underneath, something shown wonderfully as he and 474 get separated from the others and the grunt saves Chopra from the Sandmen by sacrificing herself. It's an emotional scene and Chopra shows genuine care and emotion for 474 during this moment, showing that he's learned from his actions and his views have changed. His bigoted nature has been challenged and he's actually learned from the error of his ways. A great side plot for the episode which works really well and fleshes out that artificial life debate in an engaging and enlightening way. Another big example of this dystopian future is Gatiss's exploration of the so-called colonization of sleep by companies who insist on longer working days and working weeks, ignoring the human aspect and imposing this insane level of crunch and stress on employees for increasingly lower pay.
We spend a third of our lives asleep, and time is money.
The Indo-Japanese background of the characters is extra fitting when it comes to this because you always hear these stories of Japanese game developers having to sleep underneath their desks because they're having to pour every hour of every day into their job to the extent they practically live at their office. People's personal lives are being consumed and eroded more and more by their work. So the idea of the Morpheus pods isn't even that far-fetched. These are machines that can stimulate your body into sleeping a whole night in just 5 minutes. Well, that sounds amazing, you'd probably think. I'd have so much more free time, but you wouldn't. It's not like you'd be given those 8 or so hours as time off, they'd just be added back onto your work schedule, so you'd work even more than you were before. It's a strong satire of how capitalism can become so single-minded in its pursuit of profits and success that these kinds of things are invented to create efficiency at the expense of human development.
Sleep is essential to every sentient being in the universe.
Why sleep when you could be out there making your company more money? It's a very dark concept, and I appreciate how characters like Chopra represent this pro-sleep counterculture movement who are refusing to use the pods. Sleep is a peaceful and beneficial thing for most people, recovering your body, which makes it a biological need for the betterment of your health. You could even say it's sacred, like the episode says. Messing with that need to sleep naturally is going against nature and evolution itself, just so companies can get richer, which is peak sci-fi commentary, and Gatiss explores it really well in this story, elaborating on how sleep should be a basic human right, not a luxury or something to streamline and fix.
Sleep's the one thing left to us. The one thing they couldn't get their filthy mitts on, now they're even grabbing that.
I will admit, a downside of this episode is the presence of the evil Sandmen, the result of the Morpheus pods because of a mind virus inside them. However, I do like how the episode illustrates the earworm nature of the Morpheus signal with the use of the classic Chordette song Mr. Sandman, which is a song that sticks in your head for like ages after you hear it because it's just so catchy and leaves you with no escape. This effect harkens back to one of Gatiss' original plans for the Idiot's Lantern, the villains infecting people using musical earworms. In this instant, the more you use the pods, the more the Morpheus signal worms its way into your brain and slowly takes over your body, turning you into one of these horrible, crusty monsters.
Sleep dust?
Sleep dust.
You're kidding.
Well, do I look like I'm kidding?
These Sandmen are huge humanoid creatures formed out of the sleep dust from the corner of a person's eye, the victims initially serving as unwitting spies for Rasmussen, but later becoming consumed by the goop.
What used to be sleep in your eye has turned into a carnivorous life form.
This idea is something Gatiss came up with one night when he couldn't sleep, the writer seeking to follow Moffat's own famous technique of turning everyday things into scary monsters or elements of Doctor Who stories. The whole lumpy beige aesthetic does decrease their fear factor a little bit, but their gaping mouths do make them pretty intimidating, especially when you see them in the darker areas, lurking in shadows where you can only see their outlines. I feel like the episode should have kept them as more unseen monsters, never really showing them in their entirety, but constantly reminding you they're there and giving you these little glimpses. That would have made them a lot scarier than just kind of porridge monsters. However, it is important to remember that Gatiss added the Sandmen more for the younger viewers who might not understand the wider capitalist satire. That's the main message of the episode. The Sandmen are just kind of there to be Doctor Who flair in the story. A literal representation of how the Morpheus pods are corrupting the people using them and, taking away things like sleep. I think they actually become creepier when you discover that they're essentially the zombified remains of the station's original crew. Rasmussen testing the virus on them, and even himself seemingly becoming one at the end, which is a truly horrific and creepy visual to the end of the episode with, half his face just crumbling away into nothing. It kind of gives the monsters an air of inevitability about them, because they are the end result of those pods. Once you spend even a brief amount of time in a Morpheus pod, it puts you on this trajectory, a fate even threatening Clara herself because she was pulled into one, the pod planting that same signal into her brain.
The Morpheus process has begun.
It's horrifying to think about, such a brutal and invasive mind virus being forced onto your brain against your will, and now it's just a matter of time before you become a Sandman. It's one of the darkest things about Rasmussen's scheme, how he's going to force this fate upon potentially every human being alive without them ever even realizing what he's doing to them or how.
But always, sleep claims us in the end.
I think the episode does a very clever twist with the found footage approach. Gatiss wanted to reveal that the cameras we're watching the whole time are actually something a lot more sinister, and I love how that manifests as the characters realise there are no cameras.
There's something not right here.
We don't have helmet cams.
From the very start, we just assume there are like security cameras and that the soldiers have helmet cams, like Space Marines always have in media like this. Hell, we even see the perspective of a computer panel at a couple of points, so our brains just default to the idea that this footage is all coming from traditional technology because that would just make sense. However, the truth is much darker because it's the Morpheus pods making a visual link to the user's eyes and essentially hijacking them as a camera, once again something very dark and invasive. The seeds of this are planted very early on without us realising. Chopper is introduced as someone who doesn't use the pods, and conveniently we never seem to see anything from his actual point of view for the majority of the story. It's the same with the Doctor and Clara. We never see anything from their eyes until the moment Clara enters the Morpheus pod, and then suddenly we're riding shotgun. It's a clever way of dangling the answer in front of you the whole time from the very beginning, but you don't really put two and two together until much later when it comes as this big, oh of course moment. There's a character I've mentioned a few times so far without actually exploring in depth, but after an action-packed chase scene with the Sandmen, we meet Gagan Rasmussen, the creator of the Morpheus pods, who is conveniently the last survivor of the station and keeps shitting his product the whole time, immediately putting he and the Doctor at odds because of his invention taking away the sacred nature of sleep, and being so corporate about it at the same time. Hell, even the Doctor sleeps, just whenever you're not looking. I like how Rasmussen is presented throughout the early episode. He's the first character we're shown thanks to his narration and the custom explaining elements of the story to us, but when he becomes an active part of the ongoing story, he's very cowardly and suspicious, showing us that he may not be the most reliable narrator, before he's seemingly quickly killed off by a Sandman as the space station is crashing into Neptune. I think it's cool how they play around with this presentation format, having Rasmussen always walking us through things and adding in these little tidbits about himself, alluding to all these dark fates of the characters and how he knows more than he's letting on. Rasmussen was written specifically with Rhys Shearsmith Smith in mind, and he's a perfect actor for a character like this, able to act all cowardly and slimy to hide his true mastermind plan and villainous nature as a mad scientist character. You know, he's just great. Although I hate the whole transparent glass frame things. I hate that they've become a trend ever since.
The Sandmen swallowed.
I think the Professor has been playing a long game, am I right?
Yes, towards the end of the episode it's revealed that Rasmussen is actually the big bad villain, the puppet master pulling all the strings and transporting a pod onto the rescue ship, with the reveal that this is apparently Patient Zero, the ultimate Sandman I guess, although he's missing a beer, a kendo stick and multiple sexual assault violations. I like how Rasmussen is so treacherous and cowardly we never know when he's actually telling the truth, because he's constantly manipulating and lying. You don't know if you can even trust this story about the Sandman speaking to his mind and asking him to help them get to Triton. Also, just as a side note, this is episode 9 of series 9 and you have Reece Shearsmith as a twist villain. I guess this is like a secret episode of Inside Number 9. I know I haven't talked much about the Doctor and Clara in this video, but there's admittedly not much to say, but not in a bad way.
No. No. You don't get to name things. I'm the Doctor, I do the naming.
They have a very strong episode, with their usual signature banter and chemistry on full display, and I like the inclusion of Nagata in the dynamic. She's a good third wheel and solid side character I'd love to learn more about, especially given she survives the narrative, so could easily show up in expanded media in some form or another. Hell, given Big Finish's track record, I wouldn't be surprised if she went on a few adventures on the way back to Triton. That would be about par for the course for them. I think Sleep No More has a clever sense of subversion towards the end, as the Doctor actually loses for once, or at least he doesn't win. He spends most of the episode on the back foot, constantly wondering what he's missing and trying to fill in the gaps to make it all make sense. You can spot him from early on trying to stare into the eyes of the other characters because he knows there's something different, but he only realises later on when he can see the footage of them, because he noticed there were no cameras to actually capture the footage. It's the exact kind of thing the Doctor would pay attention to, because the character is always trying to spot the little things that don't make sense. Indeed, even when the Doctor feels like he's in control when Rasmussen is dead, he knows there's still something off about the whole situation. He has that nagging sense of things not adding up because so many parts of the adventure were too convenient, like the action sequences and the story of Patient Zero having not slept in 5 years. As a character, the Doctor is aware enough to know that there's a bigger game afoot, but because he's still having to work out how to escape, he can't fit the final puzzle pieces together, and I think that's a really good way to challenge the Doctor's nature and make him more fallible and less all-knowing.
It doesn't make sense! None of this makes any sense!
Indeed, even as the Doctor, Clara and Nagata escape, 12 laments how none of this makes any sense to him, and that's because he's playing into Rasmussen's actual plan of creating a Doctor Who episode of sorts to keep people intrigued enough to watch and fall victim to the virus. This open-ended cliffhanger idea was partially due to the story originally having been planned as a two-parter, akin to Under the Lake and Before the Flood, but it was then condensed into one episode when Moffat observed how similar the two stories would have been in format. Gatiss then planned on following up on the story with a sequel prequel in Series 10, but even without that resolution, this ending still works. As Peter Capaldi himself has explained, we simply don't see the Doctor win. The entirety of Sleep No More is found footage put together by the villain of the piece, who dies at the end, so of course we wouldn't see what happens next. Rasmussen doesn't know what happens next, he's a bit preoccupied with being a pile of dust on the floor. For all we know, the Doctor arrived on Triton, destroyed all the Morpheus pods, disabled the signal, and the day was saved. That's easily an understandable and very highly likely outcome, but Rasmussen was dead by that point, so he wouldn't know if his plan succeeded or not.
And then we will destroy Morpheus forever.
I like that the ending of the episode remains faithful to the found footage technique of the narrative, leaving the crisis only half averted because there's no longer anyone to stitch together the footage anymore. Lastly, I do want to say just how much I adore the idea of Rasmussen compiling all his footage into an exciting and thrilling story, knowing it will be recovered after the crash of the space station. He twists the very idea of a Doctor Who episode against us as the viewer, weaponising it and making it a gripping adventure within the narrative itself.
I do hope you've enjoyed the show. I did try to make it exciting.
He was able to digitise the signal and weave it throughout the footage in the form of glitches and static, subtly infecting whoever watches it like some sort of cursed video or SCP. It's in his best interest to make a scene, to create something so thrilling and engaging people can't help but watch. You know, because he doesn't want them to look away. He wants it to spread across the solar system, almost literally making it go viral, and I just think that's such a clever explanation of the found footage structure.
There it is. tickles, doesn't it?
That's why the Doctor was so confused, because Rasmussen wanted it to be a show, to keep people on the edge of our seats so you can't bear to look away. It's such a brilliant meta touch, justifying the bold approach of changing Doctor Who's entire format and style of filming, and it's revealed superbly at the ending, with a once again surviving Rasmussen finally explaining this all to us because it's too late and he can gloat before he dies. It reminds me a lot of Blink in that regard, this final flourish blurring the lines between reality and fiction by acknowledging the viewer in a sense, like how Blink used that montage of statues at the end to make you paranoid of any statues anywhere. This achieves a similar effect, Rasmussen leaving you with that line about something being in your eye, just that added touch to scare kids by making them constantly second guess their sleep dust for a very long time afterwards. And that's what a lot of people should probably remind themselves about this episode. A lot of the goofiness is simply because Doctor Who is and always will be a family show, and this ending is a really strong and memorable way to scare kids. That final fourth wall break to leave a lasting impression.
Compulsive viewing. I did tell you not to watch.
Doctor Who is built on experimentation. It prides itself on its ability to blend genres, mix styles, and venture into the unknown. Sleep No More is a prime example of this. For better or for worse, it's an episode that really pushes the boundaries and experiments with the show's own format. It has all the Doctor Who elements you expect, a cool sci-fi setting, a bunch of expendable side characters, and creepy monsters, but it completely changes up the presentation and format in such a great way. The found footage lends a really unique and creative atmosphere to the episode, providing the horror in a more grounded and personal way, because you actually feel like you're there with the characters as they explore this wonderfully realised derelict space station with great production values and great set design. It's a strong first example of Doctor Who found footage and shows how effective such an episode can be, along with the satire of capitalism acting as a really good piece of socio-political commentary. The Morpheus pod serving as a really inventive and realistic warning of a dystopian future we can easily see happening. Overall, I'd give Sleep No More a controversial B grade on the Series 9 tier list. I feel like I can't put it much higher because of the flaws with the Sandman as villains, and the side characters could have been a little bit more interesting. You know, it's just one of those episodes where it's great, but there are better episodes above it. It's by no means a bad episode though, as people say. It just can't quite escape that magnetically mid pull of a Mark Gatiss episode. But I still have a very big soft spot for Sleep No More. I think it's Gatiss' best Doctor Who TV story, and it's rich with world building I absolutely adore. I stand by my initial defense of the episode, and I'll always support it no matter what people say about it. I just love Sleep No More, even if I can acknowledge it's far from the very best, especially in such a stacked, amazing series. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, even if you'll most likely disagree with my opinions. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time. Bye bye. And I'd just like to thank my Asbantium level patrons, Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson, my Diamond level patron Glenna Clark, my Platinum level patrons Maximilian Foreman and Nix Games, and all my Gold level patrons Boots, Daniel Shillito, Franzorn aka Line Vortex, Robert Hock, and Tom Azar. Thank you so much for your support.